The following lesson is from Server 2008 Applications Infrastructure Configuration 7643 LearnSmart Video Training. To find out how you can get unlimited access to our entire LearnSmart Video Training library, call 1-800-418-6789.
It's one thing to understand Windows deployment services. It's another thing to get it up and running. We actually need to understand how to do all of the things that we talk about. So we're going to take a look at how we enable the Windows Deployment Services role on our Windows Server 2008 machine and how we configure some of the appropriate settings that we'll need to manage to get this to work. Before we begin to look at Windows Deployment Services implementation, let's take a look again at the lab to make sure we know where we're working. We have our 3 primary servers that we're working with, and we're going to be installing Windows Deployment Services on the Win2K8 domain controller. This is going to make it much easier to work with since it is running the Active Directory database locally, all computer registrations are taken care of there and so forth. So what we need to do first is add the WDS role to this machine. Once you've logged on to the machine as an administrator, you can install the role. Go to the Start menu and select Server Manager. Here in Server Manager, you can see the roles that are currently installed by clicking on Roles, and it'll show you what is running. On this machine, we have Active Directory, DNS, and the Network Policy and Access Services. We want to click on Add Roles, and then click Next to select the server role that we desire. We're going to install the Windows Deployment Services, or WDS role. Remember, with any of these roles, you can click the link here to see more information about exactly what that role does give to you. So with that selected, we'll click on Next. And this will give us an overview then of the role with links to even more detailed information. We have an overview of deployment services that we could read, configuring deployment services, and even managing deployment services. So there's plenty of documentation built right in here that you might want to take a look at. We'll click on Next, and we're going to install both the deployment server and the transport server roles. This is going to allow us to fully take advantage of WDS. We're going to be able to manage our Windows deployment services and to deploy the actual operating systems. Now, if I already have a full WDS server, one that's running both of these role services, then I can install second, third, and fourth WDS servers and so on that only run the transport server service, and they're just used for multicasting capabilities. We're going to go ahead and select both of these and click on Next, and it lets us know that the server will need to be restarted after this installation process. So we're going to go ahead and click on Install to begin the installation, and then when this is done, this server will be rebooted. Now that our server has rebooted, we're ready to perform the initial configuration. Do make sure that, again, you're logged on as administrator for this. We're going to go to the Start menu and select Administrative Tools. You'll now notice that you'll have a new option for Windows Deployment Services since that role has been installed. We'll select that option. Windows Deployment Services is yet another Microsoft Management Console snap-in, so it has a very comfortable and familiar interface. We're going to expand the servers, which would be a list of all Windows deployment servers that we have in our domain or forest. And we can see that we have one here, Win2K8DC, that is in the domain trainingdomain.com. When we click on it, you'll notice that it says there's a reason for this little caution icon here, and that is that it has not yet been configured. And that's exactly what we want to do now. We want to begin the configuration. So we're going to right-click on this node and select Configure Server. This launches us into the Windows Deployment Services Configuration Wizard, which will hold our hand as we go through the process of configuring the service. And it does let us know that to successfully use deployment services, you need the computer to be a member of Active Directory, which it is. In this case, it's a domain controller. You need an active DHCP server on your network, a DNS server on your network, and an NTFS partition on this server for storing the images. So we're going to go ahead and click on Next. And the first thing it wants to know is, where do you want to store the images for deployment to the computers that will be using WDS? We'll go ahead and accept the default here of C:\remote install. But I would encourage you to use a different location in a real-world implementation, a drive that is separate from the operating system hard drive. We'll accept the default and click on Next. Now it's giving me a warning, in fact, telling me that the volume I've selected is the Windows system volume and asking if I want to continue. In this case, I'll go ahead and say yes. Now this is where we configure our initial settings for the PXE server. Remember, a big part of what WDS is a PXE server. So a PXE server can either respond to no clients, to all clients, or only to known clients. And that's what I have to choose here. Right now it's set to not respond to any client computers. We can say we want it to respond to only known client computers, or we can have it just respond to even anonymous computers. I'm going to say respond only to known client computers. And then we'll click on Finish. And it will go through the process now of setting up WDS for us. This brings us to the final screen of the wizard, where it lets us know that the last thing we need to do is actually add some images to the Windows deployment server. I'm going to deselect this and click Finish because we're going to do that manually. And now our WDS server is up and running and ready to go. The first step to installing your images is to make sure you're logged on to the WDS server as an administrator. Then go back into the WDS administration tool. So we'll click Start, go to Administrative Tools, and select Windows Deployment Services. You'll expand your servers and then go to the server where you wish to place the images. You'll notice that you have two containers here, Install Images and Boot Images. Let's look at boot images first. The boot image is used to allow a client to actually boot from the network. So these are the images that PXE compliant network interface card will pull down to the local machine so that machine can boot and either begin an installation process or actually run the operating system that it downloads. So we want to install a boot image, therefore we'll right-click on Boot Images and select Add Boot Image. It's asking us for the file location. We're going to use the default boot image from the Windows Server 2008 DVD. So I'm going to click on Browse, and I'm going to go to My Computer and select the drive. We'll click on Open to open that drive. And you can see then that we have multiple folders on the drive. We want to go into the Sources folder. This is where our images are. And you'll notice that there is an image in here that is called boot.wim. So this is the one we're looking for as a boot image. Remember, all of your images will be WIM image files. You'll notice the size here is about 140 megabytes. So it's not really large because this is just a boot image and not a full install image. I'll click on Open and then click on Next. Then it asks me for a name, and I can give this image whatever name I desire. So I might decide to call this the Server 2008 boot image. And then I could give it a description as well if I like. We'll click on Next. And it simply gives me a review of exactly what I've chosen to do. I'm happy with this, so I'll click on Next. And it's going to go through the process now of adding this boot image. Now again, this is a smaller boot image, so it doesn't take a tremendous amount of time. The next image that we'll be looking at will indeed take a little bit longer because it's going to be much larger.